Throughout my time here on YouTube, I have narrated easily over 1,000 stories. It is surprising to me how I can still come across stories that stand out and give me chills. Tonight's video has not one, not two, but multiple stories that manage to do just that. From stories of weird Amazon packages, experiments, black-eyed children, and much more. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. Stories can either be submitted at my subreddit, r/slumberreads, or my email that can be found in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I'm a chronic online shopper, so when a box arrives on my front porch, half the time I don't even know what's in it. Is it the earrings I ordered from Etsy, the bathing suit off Amazon, the box of soaps and lotions I bought on a whim, courtesy of the discount code from a random YouTuber? Because of my tendency to order and forget, it wasn't surprising when, a few months back, an envelope from Amazon appeared along with the rest of the mail in the mailbox. Despite my inability to remember what I ordered, I shook the package absently as I flipped through a stack of coupons and envelopes labeled "One-time offer, don't miss out." Oh, I thought. I bet it was the cute new collar I'd just ordered for whiskey. I tore into the package, digging my hand in deeper when I didn't immediately feel the collar. My hand closed around something, and I jerked it out with a gasp. I peered into the package, unbelieving. What the? In the package was a small clump of human hair. Now, I don't mean like a wig shipped to the wrong person, or even the hair from a doll. No, I mean a 4-inch clump of dirty blonde hair that looked like it had been hacked off with a scissors. Trying to keep from gagging, I grabbed my phone from my back pocket, searching through my recently ordered list on Amazon. The cat collar, sponges, a Ruth Ware book I've been wanting to read, absolutely nothing that might suggest I would be receiving hair. I threw the package out with a shudder. It was probably a prank. I know, but still, what kind of person puts hair in a package to be delivered to someone's doorstep? Despite my disgust in the moment, I put the package out of my mind pretty easily. After all, Whiskey's collar really did come in the next day, and then I read about the babysitting gig gone wrong in the Ruth Ware book, and by the time Monday rolled around and I was back at work, I'd all but forgotten the incident. We had a work party that day, which meant free lunch and drinks at the office. Honestly, at this point, I don't even remember what we were celebrating, but I do remember Sherry's high-pitched scream midway through. Oh my god, how did that even happen? Now, if you want to know what Sherry looks like, you can basically picture Blake Lively with brown eyes. She's tall, blonde, and beautiful, and she absolutely knows and flaunts it. What? What's wrong? There's gum in my hair. What the? Even from several feet away, I could see her eyes were filled with tears. She ran to the bathroom, followed shortly after by a kind colleague with a jar of peanut butter, only to return 20 minutes later with mascara-rimmed eyes and her hair tied back, out of sight. I had to cut it. She held her hand out defeatedly, showing us the damage. While the rest of the team offered their apologies and hairdresser recommendations, I stood still, not quite believing my eyes. In her hand was a clump, about 4 inches long, of dirty blonde hair. Could it be? No. I'd thrown the package out as soon as I'd gotten it, and anyway, how could they possibly be related? I'd gotten the package before she'd cut her hair, not after. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I drove home slowly that day, the music off in my car, trying to process the events. They made no sense though, and once again, I managed to put the incident out of my mind. That said, I would be lying if I didn't admit I was more aware of my online orders after that, and that's why, about a month after the first package, I was hesitant when I saw yet another yellow Amazon envelope jammed into the mailbox with the rest of my mail. I thought back, but the only thing I'd ordered recently had been a container of protein powder. Definitely not small enough to fit in the package. I grabbed the scissors from the counter, cutting open the envelope and peering into it. bracing myself for another chunk of hair. The package was empty, or so it seemed. I shook it and then cautiously stuck my hand into it. My fingers closed around a small, rock-like item at the bottom. As I pulled it out to examine it, a small scream escaped my lips, and involuntarily, I threw the item across the room. My cat meowed, leaping down from her window perch to investigate what I'd just thrown. "No whiskey," I said sharply, creeping toward the item. Was it? It couldn't be. But as I got closer, I could see clearly that yes, in fact, it was a single tooth, roots crusted brown with blood. I gagged, stepping backwards in shock. Was this someone's idea of a funny prank? I picked up the tooth with a tissue, shoving both it and the envelope deep into my trash can, and then thrust open my laptop, typing out a scathing message to Amazon customer service. About a month ago, I received a sealed Amazon package containing a clump of what seemed to be human hair. If that wasn't disgusting enough, I just opened a package with a bloody tooth in it. I don't know what the hell is going on, but this is disgusting and bordering on harassment. An apology and promise to investigate this shocking incident appeared seconds later, and I snapped my laptop shut, satisfied that it would be taken care of. Now, I would love to be able to tell you that I pushed the incident out of my mind, but the truth is that it was all I thought about for the next several days, flashing in and out of my thoughts at inappropriate moments. It wasn't for another week or so, though, that it happened. I'd invited a man I'd met on Tinder back to my place. A bad idea from the start, I know. We had woken up a bit late in the morning, and he was dashing around trying to get ready for work while I applied eyeliner in the mirror. In the next second, though, my hand jerked, scribbling eyeliner across my forehead as the loudest crash I'd ever heard echo through the hallway. "Jake? Jake, what's wrong?" I moved faster than I'd known I was able, and there he was, groaning in a crumpled heap at the bottom of the stairs. I'm calling 911. He shook his head, groaning again. "No." Blood bubbled at his lips as he spoke, and he brought a hand to his mouth. "Jake?" He groaned again, spitting into his palm. I knew I should be doing something, helping him, but my legs were frozen in place, my eyes fixed on the item in his hand, a single, bloody tooth. I tried to ignore the next package I got. I dumped it in the trash, not even bothering to open it. I'll never know what was in it, but I do know that my dad broke his leg the next morning. My mom called me in tears to tell me he'd fallen from the second-story roof while cleaning the gutter. I went to the post office that very day, insisting that they stop all mail to my house, and signing up for a P.O. box. I canceled my Amazon Prime membership, closed out the bank account that I'd used for online shopping, and taped a sign to my door that read, "No mail, please." This was about 2 months ago, and I've breathed more easily since, knowing there was no way for anyone to contact me. But then the office chair I've been eyeing for months went on sale. I knew it was a bad idea. I really did. But it was only $90, down from $140, and I'd been having back pain for weeks. I switched into incognito browser mode, signed up for a free trial of Prime, and made the purchase, deleting my account immediately afterwards. That was about 3 weeks ago, and my back has felt much better, I might add. The first week after I made the purchase, I held my breath every time I walked by the mailbox. After about 10 days of no packages, though, I started to breathe more easily, my heart no longer pounding as I walked through my front door. Until today, that is. I got another package this morning, just a few hours before the time of this writing. This one was in a box, not an envelope. My hands shook as I cut the tape with a knife. My breathing grew more and more labored as my trembling hands struggled to open the box. And then, in front of me, there it was. 2 brown eyes, not unlike my own, and a tongue severed at its roots. Hello, my name is Tobias. As of right this moment, I'm writing this in the hospital, in a bed, in a room, at an unnecessary to disclose location. As of right now, I have 3 broken ribs, a missing eye, and a plate in my spine so I can walk. I don't know how to begin this other than that. Just know that I am safe, and that I am being taken care of. It's been a hell of a wild ride getting to this point, however, and I want to focus on that in this message I am writing to you. A long time ago, and by that I mean 2 months, I underwent a surgery for an infection that I didn't know I had, known as endophthalmitis. It was sprung on me quickly, and after 3 days of intense pain, I went to the doctors to try and get it fixed, only to find that they would need to remove my eye as it was already too far gone, practically rotting in the socket, as the doctor said. After that surgery, I tried going without one for the time being. It's true what they say. When you lose an eye, you lose all depth perception alongside it. I couldn't play darts, pool, anything at the local bars, and I found myself running into walls I had no problems with before. Even now as I type this, I keep going back and changing words as my fast typing speed has been riddled with spelling mistakes from hitting the key to the right of it. This isn't like closing one eye and trying to do things. This is like losing half of what you can see, and then forcing the other half to widen to adjust. I really don't know how else to write it, but I'd take a lifetime of this over what I received across the event that transpired. While undergoing a checkup at the doctor's, I was caught up to by a man claiming to be important in the medical business. His name was Dr. Taylor. At least, that's how he introduced himself to me. He was taller than me, more muscular, with a hard-to-place accent and dark black hair. Though he wore the scrubs of a medical professional, he left the top button unbuttoned, and I could see that he was wearing a tank top underneath. Our conversation was rather plain, save the end bit. He took me into a room of the building for a secondary exam, apparently requested, though I had never done so, where he gave me a sort of pop quiz about how I felt, now that I wasn't able to see as well. I told him the truth. I told him that I had extreme difficulties adjusting, and was barely getting any work done or having any fun. So, he gave me an alternative. He slipped me a business card that read, Technologic, that apparently focused on people like me, people who were adjusting poorly to losing limbs or senses that were so prominent in a person's life. The next day, I arrived at the building listed on the back. It had a very weird warehouse feel, despite clearly being a hospital in of itself. I had to drive 2 miles to reach it, and then run in a small town down a few roads. The citizens inside were nice enough to give me directions, so I never suspected anything. Entering the building, I was met with Dr. Taylor and his assistant. They told me, quite simply, that I had qualified for an experimental surgery, and not only would they not bullseye me with a medical bill, that they would pay me to undergo it, 10,000 big ones, just to be a lab rat for, in their own words, a day at least. I know that the average person would say no. I mean, I was being handed a contract in that moment that had all the legal shenanigans that could rip me down with something I couldn't escape, but I made sure to read every word on that contract, and it never said anything that would bring around the thoughts of entrapment or dishonest marketing, and so I didn't question it. I signed that dotted line with pride, and Dr. Taylor beamed with delight. I lost consciousness straight afterwards. Turns out, one of Dr. Taylor's coworkers had chloroformed me, and suddenly I was in surgery without my knowledge of even beginning it. When I did wake up, I was on a hospital bed. The room was clean, the blanket was soft and washed, and I found myself welcome to the feeling of where I was despite knowing what had happened to me. I got up, walking over to the medical table, finding a glass of water and 2 headache tablets, as well as a note from Dr. Taylor himself. It read as follows. Hello, sorry to do that to you. I had to make sure you went under. As stated, you were hand-selected to undergo Technologic's very own death percentage experiment. To begin, your deposit has already been transferred, and the transaction was not denied. You are now $10,000 richer. The DPE is a very special experiment, seeing how a human being will react under knowledge of their surroundings' danger. The bionic installed in your left socket is especially equipped to read and acknowledge the area around you and automatically update you when something is nearby that would cause damage to your mind, body, or soul. You may even see it now. A small percentage block in the top left corner of your vision. Small enough that it will not disturb you if you are concentrating on something else. This percentage is a simple denominator of your current chance of being in the presence of something or someone that wants you dead. Your actions in the face of a dangerous subject is where our research comes in. Simply react accordingly with what you see. We wish to detail all actions that would associate with death, and in doing so, how that affects a person's daily life. We hope to hear from you soon. Dr. Taylor. As you can see, the note was rather helpful in explaining what I was expecting to see. Sure enough, in a small blue box, floating in a position that stayed completely stationary, no matter where I looked, the number 0% in small white letters was present. I shut my eyes, sighing, and watching from inside my own eyelids as the number increased to 1%, only reducing when I opened them again. Blinking didn't cause that, only closing my eyes for periods of time. Walking around the room held different results. The number remained at 0 when I walked lengthwise across the room, but as I approached the window, the number began increasing at a snail's pace, only reaching a maximum of 5% when I pressed my forehead against it. From there, I could see that we were only 2 stories up. A drop from that position wouldn't kill me, but would probably fracture my ankle on a shoddy landing. I suppose that's when I really thought about what was going on. The death percentage experiment was about showing me where true danger lay in the world. It didn't necessarily need to kill me. It just needed to do damage to me, just like Dr. Taylor had said in his note. The next week was spent trying to get used to seeing it everywhere I went. Even with one eye, I was used to having things move while I looked around. The blue box with the number didn't. And quite honestly, it was nauseating to focus on. When I did get used to ignoring it, and started actually recovering from what happened, I was getting back into my work and my hobbies. I had been given 2 weeks of downtime, so my first day back to my job in the office was nice. It was nice up until I got my car again for the first time in almost 2 months, and the percentage shot up to 20%. I blinked. It was odd, I thought to myself. I had never had troubles on the road. Sure, I hadn't driven in a long time because of the missing eye, but I never thought I'd be rusty. They say driving is like riding a bike after all. So I started up my car, trying to push it out of my head, getting it to start without incident. As I pulled out of my driveway, the number increased to 30%, and I slammed on the brakes. There was no way the number was right, or at least that's what I told myself. I just remember being completely frozen, trying to look at this number without actually being able to look at it. Blinking didn't help, and the number remained on my vision like a dead pixel on a monitor. Always present, always out of place. I couldn't afford not to take my car, was the thing. My job was a 30-minute walk away from my home, and driving took me 10 of those minutes as it was. I was going to be late if I didn't go now, and yet my hands remained stiffly on the steering wheel, begging myself just to let it go. It was the phone call that shook me. It was my boss, asking me where I was and if I was coming. I told him I could, and when he asked me where I was too scared to explain that there was a blue number saying I had a 30% chance to die if I drove to work that day. Of course, that excuse would never fly, so I made it up on the spot. I told him I was a bit frightened to drive. It had been 2 months after all. I didn't want to cause an accident. Luckily, my boss has always been really understanding, so he told me to take as much time as I needed, as long as I was able to come into work at some point that week. That's how I ended up walking to work. It took an hour, and that was because of the same reason why I couldn't drive. As I was walking along, the percentage number was going insane, flicking anywhere from 0 to 40 in a matter of moments, especially while I was crossing the street. It reached its peak at 42%. That was when I walked past an alleyway and made eye contact with a chained-up dog. I ran immediately in the opposite direction, barely avoiding bumping into a very confused elderly gentleman who saw the same dog and shrugged his shoulders at it. I felt like a crazy person as I arrived at my job. My boss actually met me at the door with a card and a handshake, telling me that he was proud of me for being such a respectable example of how much work mattered. I responded by looking him in the eyes and opening my mouth to thank him, and immediately freezing when the number changed to 14%. It was harrowing how quickly my respect for my boss turned to fear. What was he keeping hidden from me? Why did the number change? See, it wasn't just him. As I walked to the elevator at the back of Office 1, I made contact with a few others too. The receptionist, 9%. The balding man in cubicle L, 10%. The cute woman I liked talking to, 4%. Everyone in that building had something against me. All of them wanted to hurt me, and I didn't know how to react to that. It came to a head when I entered the elevator. There was something else in there. The head of security, Officer Danielson, who greeted me with a head nod and a wave. I hit the button to go up to floor 12, my office's floor, and traveled upwards to that floor with him. The number ticked up to 10%, which I shook off just as the elevator's rickety springs made it go haywire. Then it increased to 20%, then 30%. I looked around wondering why it was going up, until I turned around and saw Officer Danielson standing there, listening to music, just staring at the back of my head. 50%. The box turned red suddenly, alerting me to the sudden change. I took a shaky breath, taking a panicked step backwards. There was no way. This was just a glitch, I told myself. Nothing was wrong. Officer Danielson noticed the look, taking an earbud out. He asked me if something was wrong. The number raised to 65%. So without any other idea of what to do, I asked him straight. I asked him if he was going to hurt me. 75%. Officer Danielson's face changed to confusion just as it hit 80%. He told me no, he wasn't going to, and that I was overthinking things. What was I overthinking? That's what I asked him. The number raised to 85%, and his confusion changed to a sudden, smug smile. How did I know? He asked me. 90%. Know what? I asked him in reply. 95%. That he was going to hurt me. 100%. I wasn't quick enough to hit the open button on the elevator. He threw himself at me, strangling me, holding me down with hands that were too strong for me to force open. I grabbed his nightstick from the left side of his belt, swinging outwards and smashing him across the jaw. The number in my vision once again going haywire as I scrambled away from him, and slammed my hand on the emergency stop button. He grappled me again, pulling me to the floor and slamming my face against it. He was bigger than me, stronger than me. He could have killed me if he wasn't making me suffer. The floor we stopped on had people on it. That was good. What wasn't good was that he didn't stop as I freed myself, kicking him back and screaming for help. He grabbed me by the shirt, unleashing 6 knees into my ribs that I would soon learn shattered upon impact. People did come to my assistance, to give them credit. However, the head of security was built the way you'd expect. He had more authority just by being a larger man. That's why he was able to push them off of him, walking over to me and stomping hard on my back. Instantly, all feeling below my legs got vaporized. I didn't even hear the sound of something breaking. It was like he'd just hit an off switch. I felt him grab my neck again, strangling me with all of his might, like he was trying to break my neck instead of choking me. Luckily, it was then that someone else took more intense action, grabbing a heavy file from the cabinet and slamming it on the crux of his nose. It took 5 people to hold him back, and that didn't stop the barrage. Instead of violence, he began hurling insults, telling me that I should have never been born and that I wasn't made for this town. I only sat there in silence, watching him continue to yell at me, taking every racial slur he used against me. I suppose I should have mentioned, I'm of African American descent. Officer Danielson was purebred white. We'd worked together for 3 years. I would have never known he had this violence towards me or my family. Shortly after the police arrived, I was being put on a stretcher to the hospital, and they ran tests on me to see how they could try and repair me. What they did find should come as no surprise. The eyeball, the one with the death percentage experiment installed, turns out it was illegal. The people who made it had no permit to do so, and had given it many illegal pieces of equipment to make it work that way, a lot of which the police traced back to black market trading. During the surgery that installed the plate into my back, they also uninstalled the bionic, and the police are now holding it in custody. I don't miss it. Being afraid was not something I enjoyed. Everybody I meet having a chance to be like Officer Danielson had opened my eyes to what my life is to others, and that's what hurts the most. The idea that I can't walk down the street without someone eyeing me and sizing me up for their next kill. Perhaps it's better to be an unknown sometimes, but now the unknown just feels like there's a shark waiting in the waters. My hands are shaking right now, so I'm sorry if I make any spelling mistakes, but I need to write this down, even if it's just to get all my thoughts sorted. Anyway, I guess I should start this post off with some context. I just started college this year, and I've been getting used to being away from my family, which hasn't been easy. I was worried I was going to be super lonely, seeing as I don't make friends that easy, but that all changed when I met Laura. Laura is just about the sweetest person I've ever met, and the total opposite of me. When I'm quiet and reserved, Laura is bubbly and talkative, and where I tend to get down on myself quite a bit, Laura has a level of self-esteem that borders on arrogance. I don't mean that in a bad way at all though, because truthfully she's not wrong to hold herself in such a high regard. She's just awesome, and she knows it. Despite our differences in personality though, we immediately became close. We would visit each other's dorms practically every other day, and we always sat next to each other in the classes we had together. It was probably because of how close we were that I was the first person to notice something was wrong. They started about 2 months back. Laura's issues. At first it was subtle, that she seemed a little less energetic than usual, and she would snap at me for making comments that she would usually laugh at. Not long after, the weight loss started. I didn't think too much of it at first. Between that and her attitude shift, I figured she must have been stressed about something. I've never been one to pry though, so I didn't bring it up. Just hoped that she'd be back to her usual sunny self soon. But as the days turned into weeks, it became apparent that something was very, very wrong with Laura. Although she tried to hide it beneath baggy clothing, it was obvious just how much weight she'd lost at this point. By now, people were whispering behind her back, speculating as to what was going on. The general consensus among the gossipers seemed to be that she was anorexic or something, but I never believed that. Anyone who knew Laura as well as I did knew that she never cared about dieting, much less starving herself. Besides, there was one crucial fact that just wouldn't add up with the whole eating disorder story. Laura was eating all the goddamn time. Laura wasn't just eating constantly in the way her usual college student was. It was like she had a garbage disposal for a stomach, eating massive portions of meals, and even more snacks in between. Her dorm roommates even remarked to me that they had seen her sneaking out in the middle of the night and coming back with bags full of fast food and junk from the convenience store. Of course, the realization of just how much Laura was actually eating led the rumors in another direction, that she was just throwing it all up. But once again, I knew that wasn't true. Even though she had grown progressively snappier and colder, we were still practically attached at the hip, and in true female friend fashion, we almost always tagged along with the other to go to the bathroom. She was rarely out of my sight, and not once did I see, hear, or smell anything that would indicate she was vomiting up the copious amounts of food she'd been eating. So I didn't know what was going on with Laura. But I knew it was nothing like that. Eventually, I decided I was going to ask Laura what was going on. There had to be some sort of normal explanation, right? So one day, while we were alone in my dorm room together, I confronted her, asking what the hell was up and whether she was okay. When I asked this, she just started crying, mumbling something about, "It just keeps getting worse," and I don't know what to do. I think that was the moment I lost any hope of there being any explanation that would end with a, "Don't worry, I'll be fine soon." Laura ended up shrugging out of her sweatshirt since it was warm inside, and for the first time I saw the extent of her deterioration. She used to be all curves and rosy cheeks, soft around the edges with bright eyes that were full of life and youthful exuberance. But the girl who sat in front of me was none of those things. Just a sickly, skeletal frame, pale skin pulled taut over the harsh angles of her collarbones and wrists. I tried not to show my horror on my face, but Laura could always read me better than anyone else ever could. The sobs returned even harder than before, and as she wept, I remembered her face fell into her hands, and her voice dropped to a whisper as she said, "I can't stop it. I'm starving, but nothing helps, and I don't know what to do. What's going to happen to me?" But of course, I didn't know any better than she did. For the next couple of days after that, Laura was nowhere to be found. She was absent in all our classes, and when I checked with her roommates, they hadn't seen her either. I tried to call her and text her, but she didn't answer. It was like she had vanished off the face of the earth. As much as I tried not to worry, Laura was all I could think about. She had looked so weak and frail. What if she passed out somewhere and died all alone in some ditch or alleyway or something? But there was nothing I could do about it. So I sat with that feeling of dread, until finally, after 3 whole days of being completely missing, Laura came back, and she looked healthy again. In fact, it was like the weeks she spent slowly wasting away had never happened in the first place. She was back to normal in virtually every way. But how was that possible? Nobody recovers from that level of emaciation in just a few days. Nobody. I tried to ask her about it, get some idea as to what the hell was going on, but she brushed off any attempt of mine to talk to her. After a couple of days of her dodging my questions, I almost gave up and decided to drop it. After all, she seemed okay now, and that was all that mattered, right? But something still didn't sit right with me. Although Laura was back to normal physically, she had grown distant, like we hadn't spent half a year closer than sisters. Eventually she moved seats in class, and stopped waving to me when we crossed paths on campus. One day I even cornered her in an attempt to get her to speak to me about something, anything. But even then she just averted her eyes, looking almost ashamed. And she shoved me aside and ran off. There was nothing I could do, so I just tried to return to some sort of sense of normalcy, if that was even possible without Laura by my side. It was like the fears I held at the beginning of the year had come true, that I was going to be all alone. I wish it had ended there. I wish that Laura and I had just gone our separate ways, and that I could just move on with my life and let her fade into memory. For a while it seemed like that was going to be the case, but after what happened last week, it became clear that wasn't going to happen. I don't think I've mentioned my part-time job yet, but a few days a week I work the graveyard shift at a 7-Eleven near campus. Not the most glamorous gig, but it helps pay for expenses, and I don't mind the nighttime hours screwing up my sleep schedule a bit. Anyway, last week I was headed home after my shift ended, and as usual I took my shortcut through the alleyway to get back to campus. Laura always bugged me about that when we were still on speaking terms. She thought I was going to get killed or mugged or 1,000 other possible things. But hey, I'd been fine this long. And besides, there was never anyone in that alley anyway. Well, almost never. That night was the first exception. As I turned the corner into the alley, I immediately realized I wasn't alone. It was dark, but thanks to a flickering lamp above, I could make out the silhouettes of what looked like a man and a woman. Based on the noises coming from them, I assumed at first that they were just making out, which, okay, was a little weird for the location, but I don't judge. Whatever. As I got closer, I could see that the man was pressed up against the wall, his face obscured by the woman's head, which was turned away from my direction. I could have turned around, but I decided it wasn't worth the extra walking, so I resolved to just duck my head and speed walk by to give them some privacy. But something stopped me. I couldn't place it at first, but something felt wrong all of a sudden. It took me a moment to realize what it was. The man had gone silent, his body unmoving and limp in the woman's embrace. I think my body knew something before my mind did, because bile began to rise in my throat before I even registered the steady dripping sound of liquid against asphalt. My eyes drifted to the source of the noise, a puddle of fresh blood, nearly black in the dim light, pooling across the ground as more and more of the stuff dripped down from what I then realized was the man's face. I froze where I stood, unable to make sense of the scene before me. I knew I should run, Something in my head was telling me to run as fast as I could, but I didn't. And then, the woman released her grip on the man and his body slumped to the ground. As his head lolled to the side, right in the path of the lamplight, I saw his face for the first time. Or rather, what was left of it. Massive chunks of flesh had been torn right off, leaving gaping, bloody gashes, and exposed where teeth met jawbone. I had only seen those kinds of wounds in nature documentaries, where they zoom in on the carnage that takes place when a lion meets with its prey. But this was no gazelle. This was a full-grown man, no more than 5 feet away from me, with blood still streaming from his mutilated face. And the woman standing above him, I realized with horror as she turned towards me, was unmistakably Laura. Her mouth was dripping with what could only be the man's blood. Blood that stained her hands and clothes and hair. A scene that left me at a loss for words, unable to move despite my heart pounding in my chest. The only thing I remember thinking was, this is where I die. This is it. But it wasn't. Laura seemed almost as bewildered as I was. There was that look again. The shame, the fear, the failure to meet my gaze. After a moment that felt like hours, she spoke, saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It was all I could do. I'm sorry." What did that mean? At the time, I had no idea. I wanted to ask her, but she just turned and she ran as fast as she could, disappearing into the night and leaving me alone in the alley with a dead man for company. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I snapped back to my senses and called 911 to report the body. When the police and the coroners arrived, they questioned me, but I didn't say anything about Laura. What would I have said? That I saw my ex-best friend tearing a man's face apart with her bare teeth? I just told them I came across the body on my walk home. Not technically a lie. And they let me go home after a while. Somehow, I even managed to sleep. The next morning, the newspapers had already picked up the story of the dead man in the alleyway. They were running with the theory that a feral dog pack must have been roaming the city. I didn't blame them for jumping to that conclusion, because what else in the city could maul a grown man like that? Only I knew the answer. And even then, there was so much that I didn't know. Why did Laura do it? How did she do it? What did she mean by, "it was all I could do"? I try not to dwell on those questions, but they plague my thoughts all the same. The next day, Laura wasn't in class, or the next day, or the day after that. I had the feeling she had left for good this time, and maybe that was for the best. Laura might not even be Laura anymore. Maybe she hadn't ever been since her miraculous recovery from near starvation. I made up my mind a couple of nights ago to try and not think about it. I was feeling hungry, so I went down to the dining hall to grab dinner. Distracting myself with food seemed like a good first step to putting the past behind me. I was ravenous, and after 3 trayfuls, I headed off to sleep. Then, yesterday I woke with a gnawing feeling in my stomach. I didn't give it much thought, just made sure to eat a good-sized breakfast, and made my way to class. But the feeling went on all day, even after dinner last night. That's when the fear began to creep into the back of my head. I told myself I was being stupid and paranoid, and that my body was just responding to stress, but in my gut I knew something was very, very wrong. And so I ate, more and more and more, until I couldn't reasonably make up an excuse to go on eating any longer. I sank to my knees, sobbing as I realized I felt as hungry, if not hungrier, than before. I told myself to just go to sleep, and that maybe in the morning this feeling would go away. But this morning I woke up, still hungry. And that's when I knew for sure. It was too late. I don't know what to do now. And so I'm making this post. Maybe the last thing I'll ever write. Whatever Laura is now, I don't want to find out firsthand. But I know the only option is to end this. And if I'm going to do that, it better be soon. Because I swear my jeans are just a little too loose today. And when the light hits my face in the mirror, the line of my jaw is just a bit too sharp. My pallor, just a shade too dull. Whatever happens in the following weeks, I'll try to be strong. And when the time comes, I'll make my decision. I just hope to God it's the right one. This is an experience that I will never forget. It was a while ago, but it's still fresh in my mind. I work for a local lumber yard. They supply the surrounding businesses and homes with fresh timber for whatever woodworking they need. I had been working for them part-time for at least 3 summers. I'm still in high school, so I decided I wanted to make some money while still in school. My job mostly consisted of moving and milling wood around the yard. I enjoyed it due to that I was able to get paid money, and I was able to stay in shape. On occasion, they'd have me work on jobs outside of the property. I was already proficient with all the tools needed for chopping and hauling wood, axes, chainsaws, etc. So one early Saturday morning, I got up to do my normal morning routine, shower, breakfast, then head to work. I didn't have a car at the time, so I had to use my bike. When I showed up to work, I did my normal tasks, milling large planks, moving large bits of wood to customers, etc. Most of the day had gone by, and I only had about an hour left of my shift. I was just done helping another employee when my manager called me over. For this story, I'll call him Mark. Mark was a tall fellow, had legs longer than his whole upper body, arms that stretched down past his waist, and eyes that pierced your soul, but he was actually a very nice guy. He'd always help me out with any work-related issues, and even help me out at home sometimes. So he calls me over and explains that he has an extra job for me. Since I was still in high school, he would often give me extra work for extra money. He told me that one of the local bike and hiking trails nearby had some fallen oaks that were obstructing the path. He wanted me to take care of it in exchange for a few extra bucks. I said yes, of course, and I headed over there with the Gator, a small work vehicle they allowed me to use. When I got there, the path was too small for the truck to get in, so I had the rotten job of hauling all my equipment to the designated area. When I arrived, I was about a quarter mile into the woods. I didn't really mind it, due to me being a nature lover. When I observed what had happened, I saw that there was about 3 2-foot thick trees laying in awkward angles across the trail, so I knew I had a lot of work to do. I was halfway through the first tree when I noticed something I hadn't before. The trees didn't look like they fell by themselves. It looked like something pushed them over. I came to that conclusion by noticing what looked like claw marks at the base of each tree. I was a little spooked, but kept on with my work, reasoning it could have been a boar or a bear. It was sometime later. The sun was close to setting, so I was kind of in a hurry. I was just finished with the last tree. I had turned my chainsaw off. Now that it was quiet, I stood for a moment just taking in all the sounds of nature, when I heard something not right. I heard a slight brush of what sounded like nails raking across bark. I managed to turn to where I heard the sound, but the sun was pretty much set, and it was hard to see very far. So I turned my flashlight on and scanned the forest, looking for what could have made the noise. When I made the decision to turn the flashlight about 30 degrees to the right, the light shone on what I can only describe as an unholy abomination. This thing, not animal or human, it had the long snout of a wolf, long slender arms that ended with long sharp claws, antlers protruding out of the top of its head, and eyes that looked too human for any wild beast. The thing that scared me the most was its skin. It seemed to be wearing the skin. Imagine the character Leatherface, how the skin on its face is not completely connected. As soon as I saw it, it made the most bone-chilling screech I've ever heard. I bolted out of there, leaving all of my equipment behind. I didn't care. When I reached my truck, I practically swan dove into the front seat, and I nearly stomped through the floor trying to push the pedal. When I was in motion, I looked back to see if it was following me. It wasn't. When I was on the road, I just drove home. I was gonna explain it in the morning. I made sure to lock all of my doors and windows. I also kept a gun next to me. I barely got any sleep that night. The next morning I drove the Gator back to work and quit that day. I was done with the forest. When I got back home, I did some research on what I saw, and I came to the conclusion that what I saw that night was what the internet calls a skinwalker. I could have ended this by saying it all ended there, but I was wrong. The reason I'm writing this is because a few nights ago, I had happened to wake up in a cold sweat from a nightmare to just catch a glimpse of a tall, hairy figure darting past my bedroom window. I know it's back, and it followed me. I just hope and pray that that's the last I'll ever see of this creature. I know many of you have already read or heard about the stories about black-eyed children. Here's another story to the collection for you. I had gotten home pretty late from work one night, sitting in front of the TV, zapping through the channels when my stomach grumbled. I needed to make some dinner. I chugged down the last of my beer and put the glass bottle in my well-sorted trash bin. The perks of being a chef at a quite fancy restaurant is that you get to take home some of the leftover produce from the day. New will be bought in tomorrow so we can serve our customers the most fresh dishes. I opened the fridge and plucked out enough things to make a spicy stew of some sort. After turning on my rice cooker, I opened the window to the kitchen. Ventilation was not my house's forte. I was salivating from my mouth when chopping the vegetable, clearly hungry after the long day of working in a kitchen without eating except for tasking sauces here and there. When the rice had around 10 minutes left on the clock, I put everything down in a pot with some cream and a few spices to let it cook until everything was finished. The minute I had served my plate, there was a knock on my door. Who would visit me this late at night without calling first? And I had a functioning doorbell, so I was a tiny bit confused when I walked to the hall. Looking through the peephole at the door, I saw something I did not expect. 2 children, one a bit taller than the other, holding hands. I saw the older one looking up towards me, as if he knew I was there. They were both wearing pajamas, which made sense because, that young, it was way past their bedtime. Just as I was about to open the door, I drew back my hand from the doorknob. One more look at them before I opened the door, I thought. That's when I noticed what was off. They both had black eyes. The entire eyes, not only the iris. Now I was terrified. Another knock. Please, sir, we are just so hungry. Please let us in. I locked my door and ran into the kitchen again, closing the window quickly and grabbing my phone, ready to call the police if they wouldn't leave. Another knock, now with 2 hands. Another voice, higher pitched than the first one. Please, Andrew, open the door. We are so hungry. How do you know my name? I yelled back through the door. I'm calling the police. Please open the door. We just want to come in and eat. The police showed up 10 minutes later, but the children were gone. They asked me to describe them and I did, leaving out the part of their black eyes so I would not seem crazy. I asked if they had heard anything from any parents missing their children tonight, but their answer was no. I wasn't hungry anymore. I tried to eat, but it was impossible. I stored the leftovers in the fridge and went to bed, making sure that my door was locked, and turned on the lights to the hall next to my bedroom just to be sure. The next day, nothing remarkable happened. My girlfriend came over at night and we watched a movie. We had only been together for about 1 month, so I didn't bring up the story from the night before, scared that she would think I was crazy or evil to not let the children in. When it had gotten dark, we both felt hungry. I asked her if it was okay to eat from what I had cooked yesterday, and she was more than happy to eat food prepared by me. She told me to wait in the living room because I had already cooked the dinner. She at least wanted to serve it for us. I heard her open up the window to the kitchen. It scared me, but I didn't tell her that. Me being paranoid would only lead to questions I didn't want to answer. She came back into the living room with my plate and a glass of wine. I thanked her nicely and kissed her on the cheek before she went back into the kitchen to grab her own plate. We knocked on the door again. I froze. I heard my girlfriend approach the front door. I stood up. Hello? Let us in. We are so hungry. The same voice as last night. Andrew, there are 2 children out here. I heard her turn the lock on the doorknob. Alexandra, don't. I screamed while running to the hall. She gasped as she opened the door. The children were all wearing pajamas, but there were more than 2 this time. A hurdle of them stood outside my porch, only lamp shining above the first few of them, shining back from their black eyes. Can we come in? It smells so good. The oldest boy said. I frantically shut the door, Alexandra holding herself to the wall in shock. We called the police, but once again the children were gone when they showed up. Alexandra and I both told the officers about the children, more than a class size of them with black eyes just outside my door. They told me to stay in touch and call even sooner if it happened again. They were interested to say the least, now that 2 people had seen what had happened. I moved in with Alexandra the next day, pretty soon for being together for just a short period of time. but the both of us were too scared to sleep alone now. We always lock the door when we enter the house, and never open the kitchen window when we are cooking. I've always had a fascination with abandoned buildings. Ever since I was old enough, I would gather my friends and we'd go on a trip to any neglected construction sites or haunted neighborhoods we could find. The adrenaline of being somewhere we don't belong just stuck with me. I would occasionally go exploring on my own just for the extra rush. Loneliness just adds a powerful vibe. You could say I was an adrenaline junkie. Recently I went on an exploration that made me rethink my adventures. It was a nice summer day in Chicago. I was visiting some friends who went to a community college there, and one of them had given me a tip on an abandoned building that I should check out. Of course I was going to have a look. It'd almost be crazy for me not to. It was already the afternoon, nearing nightfall. My friend mentioned that the place was an abandoned parking building that was underused and was inevitably closed off. I had packed myself some Lunchables, a flashlight, and water. The second I arrived, I got immediate chills. Sure enough, and fitting the description, it was an abandoned parking building. I forgot to mention I also brought a Polaroid camera. I know it sounds cliche, but I was a horror fanatic, and if I caught any paranormal incidents, I could use the physical pictures as proof. The place was fenced off, so I couldn't park my car inside the building. I snapped a picture of the outside of the building, then proceeded to climb the fence. I dropped to the floor on the other side and immediately a chill shot down my spine. I felt unusually nervous. I've never felt this worried on any of my previous ventures. I started on my way to the building. As expected, it was creepier up close. There were long vines that streamed down the sides of the building and hung off of the various ledges. Tall grass surrounded the area, and small weeds sprung from small cracks in the cement of the bottom floor. Usually, you'd find graffiti or even broken glass bottles or anything like that in this place. But not here. The place looked like it was built and then left alone and never tampered with. I assumed that it was simply because I was on the first floor. On that note, nothing resided in the area. It just looked like an empty parking lot. I decided to move further, so I made my way to the second floor. Upon entering, I immediately noticed the change in architecture. There was a wall that divided the entrance of the floor from the other side of the room. In the middle of the wall from where I was facing was a door. A door? Why was there a door? It wasn't even big enough for a small car to fit through. I chuckled at the idea that this was probably the reason the building was abandoned. I pulled out my camera and took a picture. The small piece of paper ejected from the camera. I shook it, then inspected the photo. Nothing out of the ordinary. I placed it in the pocket of my backpack and walked up to the door and opened it. The second I entered the room, a putrid smell filled my nose. The smell was so bad, in fact, that I had to place my hand over my mouth and nose to keep from hurling. When I looked into the room, I saw something in the middle of the floor. From where I was standing, it looked like some sort of dead animal. The flies that darted around the corpse only further indicated that possibility. I hesitantly approached the middle of the room, while covering the bottom half of my face with my shirt. Upon closer inspection, I realized that the thing was in fact a dead, mutilated pig. It had claw marks that streamed down to the lower half of its body, which was entirely missing. You could see the guts of the animal strung out of its body. I immediately received a sensation of utter horror. By this point, I had definitely seen enough. I turned around and made my way to the door. I placed my hand on the doorknob and was met with the realization that the door was locked. I sat there at that door for a good 3 minutes, frantically pulling the knob to no avail. I stepped back and took a deep breath. Now calm, I began to consider my options. I pulled up my phone and was met with no bars. Despite this, I knew I could still call 911. However, no one picked up. The phone just kept ringing. I tried not to panic, as it wouldn't help anything. Even so, I was still shocked. I thought that maybe I could jump off the side of a ledge. I walked over to the half wall of the building and peered over. My eyes widened with fear. Some way, and somehow, I was multiple stories higher than the second floor. Not just that, but the building seemed taller than before. I looked up to see the unbelievable. The building reached up above the clouds, and so on. I couldn't believe my own eyes. I pulled out my camera to snap a shot of what I was seeing. The second I heard the click of the camera, A loud noise started going off behind the door to the room. I could see physical movements on the door that looked like pounding. I stumbled backwards, almost falling down. The door looked like it was almost giving in. I stood up and began to run to the ramp that led to the next floor. When I got to the ramp, I began to hear another noise. I turned my head to see that the pig that was once dead on the ground was now looking over at me, squealing mildly. It should be dead, but yet it was screaming Bloody Mary. I didn't give it another thought and continued up the ramp. Like before, this floor had a wall and then a door. I opened the door, and as I began to enter, I heard the door from the floor below me burst open, followed by heavy thumping footsteps rushing up the ramp. Adrenaline surged through my body as I quickly ran into the room and slammed the door behind me. I stumbled backwards and fell on my back. I sat up with my heart pounding, looking at the door. It took me a moment to realize that I no longer heard the footsteps and no longer heard the squealing pig. I waited a few seconds before laying back to catch my breath. I felt no inclination to inspect the room behind me, nor did I want to sit back up. I decided to close my eyes and rest for a bit. I don't remember how long it was before I fell asleep. I awoke to crickets and a warm breeze that tickled my cheeks. I sat up dazed and confused for a few moments before I jolted to a standing position. It took me a moment before my eyes adjusted to the darkness. I saw the blue hue of night. The moment felt beautiful despite the previous events. I reached in my backpack and grabbed my flashlight. I noticed that my camera was already tucked in my backpack. When I flicked on the light, I realized that I was back on the first floor. Without even thinking, I rushed to the fence and practically threw myself over. I stumbled into my car and pulled out of the area and back on the main road. When I finally could catch my breath, I looked into the rearview mirror. My eyes caught the building for 3 seconds just before it disappeared behind the tree line. It looked completely normal to me. It was no longer a skyscraper that reached through the clouds. I felt a moment of relief. When I got back to the hotel I was staying in, I threw my backpack on the bed and sat down beside it. I thought that maybe it was all just a dream. Maybe I passed out due to the heat and had a nightmare. I opened my backpack to eat a Lunchable when I saw them. 3 Polaroid pictures. I pulled them out and flipped through them. The first one was the picture of the abandoned building that I took when I arrived. The second was the picture of the door that I saw when I reached the second floor. So it really did happen. When I got to the third photo, my eyes widened. In the photo, I expected to see the building reaching into the skies, but instead, I saw myself standing next to some words on a wall that looked as if they were written in blood. The words read, "Never come back." I since burned the pictures and decided to forget the whole experience. I lost the will to ever explore abandoned buildings again. I'm writing this now to get it off my chest, and maybe even warn any people who plan to explore an abandoned building in the future. I lived in El Paso my entire life. My great-grandparents moved from Germany in the 40s, before World War II ravaged the country. They lived in El Paso for the rest of their lives, deciding not to go back to Germany. Since I lived in El Paso, I know every nook and cranny of this blessed city. If you want to embrace art, go to the El Paso Museum South. Want to hike? Head to some of the Franklin Mountains more up north. But when I saw an advertisement for job listing, there was a restaurant I never heard of in my life, living here in El Paso. Mex-Tex Cantina. It was more east of the city. This restaurant had been in El Paso for 40 years apparently. As a 20-year-old man that's lived in El Paso for 20 years, a restaurant that existed for 40 years. I would have heard it talked about at least once in my lifetime. I would have heard a review from online or friends. I would have seen it leaving the city going to South Padre Island. I would have even eaten there in the bundle of restaurants I eat at in El Paso. But no, not a single word of it. One time I was talking to my friends on my way to a party in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I brought up the question about the restaurant in eastern El Paso. Hey, have you guys ever heard or seen the Mex-Tex Cantina restaurant? They never heard of it. They told me that they never saw, heard, or even went there. That theory checks off. When I was looking at the building listing, the infamous Mex-Tex Cantina, printed in yellow and blue bold letters, Mex-Tex Cantina, help wanted. I was desperate for a job. I got evicted from my house and moved into an apartment complex. My landlord just got out of a divorce, and she has been extra catty. Usually, when I miss a payment for a day, she would dust it off her shoulders. Ever since her hubby left, she would scold me down like I was prey for her monstrous rage. When I saw that there was a job listing for the cantina, I thought I should work there, since I never heard about it. I could add it to my book of places in El Paso. I ripped the job listing out of the magazine and brought it with me to the interview. When I got the job, I quit the next day. The infamous Mex-Tex Cantina should shut down immediately before anyone or more people get hurt. Just stay away from the cantina that's in eastern El Paso. I pushed the door open. The smell of food hit my nose. All of a sudden, I became hungry. I snap out of my daydreaming about eating food, then remember my purpose of arrival. I pull the magazine piece out of my pocket. I walk up to the counter with a lady standing behind it. She was typing at her computer. "Hey ma'am, I'm here for the job listing. Are y'all still hiring?" The lady looked up at me and stopped typing on her computer. She pulls out a clipboard from under the counter and hands it towards me. "Fill this out. I'll get you in with an interview with the boss later." I grabbed the clipboard from her hand, then I hold the pen in my other. When she spoke, she had an accent like she was from the Bronx. Whenever a word ended in she would replace it with an ah. Like the words later, she'd say later. I look at the clipboard and scan it up and down. I look back at the woman and thank her. I walk to an empty table and sit down. Then I start writing my name. I finish some questions like the typical phone number or age and gender. One question stumped me. How much do you weigh? This was a strange question. I've never seen filling out a job application. It's strange that they didn't ask for my resume. Something was odd, but I shrugged it off because I thought it was a new way of getting a job. How much do you weigh? I placed the tip of the pen above the line, 150 pounds. The questions started to get odder after that. What's your height? How fast can you run? But this one question shook me to the core. Do you have any phobias? That question was really odd, but I just continued writing. Heights, spiders, giant crowds. I placed the pen back on the clipboard and stand up. I walked back to the counter with the woman behind. I finished filling the application. Do I give it back to you? The woman looks at me and grabbed the clipboard. Yeah, thank you. I will get you in with the boss in the future. That was June 5th. She places the paper application in a box labeled forums. Ah, yes. June 5th is perfect. I give her a thumbs up and head on my way. On the ride back home, I was thinking about the strange questions on the application. Since it was my first time, I didn't know anything about resumes and applications or how they work, but I don't think those are questions appropriate. I should have asked the lady behind the counter about it. It was June 5th. It was time for me to meet the boss of Mex-Tex Cantina for a chance at a job. I drive all the way to El Paso, pull up in the parking lot of the restaurant, and park. I realize I'm the only person in the parking lot, the only car parked. I step out of my car, lock it, and walk inside the building. When I walked in, the woman behind the counter immediately recognized me like I was her family member. Ah, yes, Oscar. The woman walks out from behind the counter and leads me into the boss's office. Just wait in here and the boss, Molotov, will be in shortly. The woman walked out, shut the door behind her. The office was chilly. There were frames with no photos in them hanging on the wall tilted. The door behind me opens and walks in Molotov. Ah, you must be the boss Molotov. I reach out my hand for him to shake. He shakes my hand and we sit down. About an hour later, I walk out of the office and say goodbye to Molotov. I got the job, and my shift was starting the next night. The interview was more normal than expected, more normal than the application, and me not knowing about the place. Changing my sleep schedule was hell, but I managed to do it. I wake up, get prepared, and head down to the restaurant. Now I was starting my first night shift. I walk in the empty restaurant. The last behind the counter cocked her head up to me. Oh, gracias a Dios. The woman walked out in a hurry without saying anything to me, but then she turned around to me. I left a list of rules on the counter for you. Good luck. She walked out and into the darkness. stood there for about a minute until I gained the courage to move. I walked behind the counter near the woman's computer. Left there was a list of rules and a latex wrapping. Hello. If you're reading this, you might be a new employee. These are a list of rules for you to follow during your shift. Make sure to read this carefully and play them out perfectly. The writing on the list was all bold black letters on a paper-colored orange, very bright. Step 1. When a man walks in with a plaid shirt, do not look at him for the rest of the time he is there. Make sure you do not talk to him and give him only a cup of espresso coffee. When he leaves, leave the cup there. The first step was giving me chills down my neck. Then I continued reading the list. Step 2. When the lights ever flicker, run in the bathroom and hide in the last stall. A shotgun is under the counter. Make sure you bring it with you. I read the second step a second time. More chilling than the last. Step 3. If a red Hyundai Elantra pulls in the lot, stare at it until it leaves. Limit your blinking, and you'll be good for the night. Step 4. If you see hands coming from the ceiling, save yourself. Use the shotgun. Step 5. If you leave any time before 6 a.m., do not go back home ever again. I throw the list down on the counter. My hand slides under the counter. I felt the shotgun. I move my finger to the side. The ammunition. The door opened with the annoying bell that indicates someone entered. I looked up. The man in plaid. I cocked my head down to the ground and already start making the coffee. I place a cup under the dispenser and coffee started to come out, filling the cup with dark liquid. I grab the cup, still steaming hot. I walk around the counter and look for feet sitting at a table. I scanned some more. I found shiny shoes sitting at a table. I immediately placed the cup down on the table and walked back to the counter. My neck was getting sore from keeping it bent down, but when the doorbell rang, it was music to my ears. I look up. The man was gone. All that was left was a cup on the table. I remember that I had to leave it there, so I just ignored it. My phone gets a notification. I pull out my phone and notice I had a text from Molotov. You still alive? When I read that, I snapped. I was already on my way out of the store until I remembered the last step. If you leave any time before 6 a.m., do not go back home ever again. That made me stay in my spot. Just having the thoughts of what will be waiting for me at my apartment, I start to walk slowly back to the counter. I text Molotov back. Going strong. I sent it with a flexing emoji. He sent a reply back. What step are you on? I type out my reply. The first. Then I sent the text. That was all from Molotov. So far so good. But the sudden burn out of a light rod made me reach for the shotgun. I yanked the shotgun from under the counter and accidentally dropped it on the floor, which made the shotgun go off. A loud bang filled my ears. Then I noticed blood on the floor. I looked at the direction of the bullet's travel, and a carcass of something in a human was just laying there dead. It was very indescribable. The light started to flicker like a strobe light. I quickly grabbed the shotgun and book it to the bathroom, then dip into the last stall. I could hear wet footsteps slapping outside the bathroom. Footsteps coming closer and closer. Then the bathroom door opened. I cocked my shotgun and aimed it towards the stall. The flickering stopped. I slowly step out of the stall. I could see wet, black footsteps leading towards the stall I hid in. I poke my head out of the bathroom door. Wetter footsteps. I make it back to the counter and put the shotgun back under the counter. This night was an affliction. A night nobody would expect. After reading the list, I didn't expect anything more. But when I snapped out of my stupor, in comes the red Hyundai Elantra. Thinking back on the list, I stared at the car, trying my hardest to limit my blinks. But that was almost impossible. A human blinks 12,000 times a day. I would have at least added to the 12,000 times at this hour. The car pulled into one of the parking lots and just sat there. I stared, to the point where my eyes became heavily bloodshot. The car shut off. My eyes started to automatically squint. I tried my best to keep my eyes open, but I failed. In one of my blinks, the car disappeared. I sigh in relief. My phone gets a notification, a text from Molotov. I'm gonna assume you finished the last step. Good job. You can now leave. I sighed in relief. I start to walk towards the exit. I open the door and step out. Then I realize the last step. If you leave any time before 6 a.m., Do not go back home ever again. I looked at my foot, stepped outside. Most of my body was out of the building. I look at the clock on my phone. 5:59 a.m. I left the building before 6 a.m. Now, I can't go home.